It strikes me that, we should use Dr. King's approach of that it's not about the color of your skin, it's about the content of your character. Could we focus on the content of character and get our children to treat each other well, to have self-respect, to be decent to other people? And that strikes me as, sort of the core, what are we trying to do is raise human beings.
Right, exactly. And that's, again, this goes back to this, these identity politics. And I had a gentleman, Charles Tendell, on a while back. I haven't posted this particular clip, but we were talking about, he happens to be black. And he was saying, that, I forget how we segued into this, but he was saying he had a white friend, a very nice woman, where she had told him about the struggles he had faced with racism, oppression, and everything. And he said, that's not my experience. But she was telling him, no, it must have been. Like, she was
trying to
impose, right?
That's right.
And I've said this before, this whole idea about privilege, everything. It's not, it's this black and white thing is not to deny that, when someone sees you, a whole bunch of schemata are triggered. People will react to you differently, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, tall, short, attractive or not. All these particular schemata get triggered, but to assume that one particular person is going to be, reflective of the entire categories to which people are, assigning them is silly, right? We don't know that person's individual story. And it just worries me that we're becoming so reductionistic. And it's not just simply that we're putting people into boxes. It's that if you're in the wrong box by dint of some characteristic of you, you have no voice. You're not allowed to speak. You're the bad person. That's what's worrying me. And because it's very, disempowering and it's very distressing. I've got a lot of patients who are saying that. They're going like, why are people treating me this way? I've done nothing wrong. Why are they making all these assumptions? And B, the people who are in the other boxes, supposedly the good boxes, the oppressed boxes, they're basically getting this implicit message that since you are in this category or in this box, you are going to have these hardships, you are going to have all these problems. And to me, that's very disempowering. It's not giving them a leg up. It's setting them up for failure versus saying the reality is you may have to face certain prejudices, biases, obstacles. But if you were raised right, or if you have the right supports today, you can do it. You may have to work harder, you may have to do this or that, or find a way to navigate through what might be a biased system. But there are so many biases out there. Let's not assume that any one person is, again, by default, going to be handicapped, because that kind of language really, and again, I see that with my students, they're just taking on this victimized role. It's just so disempowering.
I agree. No, I think, it's just a different type of stereotyping, right? It's a liberal stereotyping that's this sort of earnest stereotyping, but it's just stereotyping, again, to assume that by looking at somebody, you can know what they've been through. You can't know what they've been through without asking them.
Exactly.
And that struck me so often in my own classes when I was teaching at Michigan State, and I would have white male students who were from rural areas. They struggled with college, some of them really struggled with college. Some of them really struggled with the social expectations within a big university campus. And often the cultural shock to them was as much to anybody who was on that campus. But the assumption was to look at them and to say, oh, they're a young white male, therefore they have all of the privilege in the world. But in fact, culturally, often they came in a position that was underprivileged because they hadn't been taught how to manage in a system that was so large and so depersonalized. For example, when they had grown up in a system that was very personalized, and so it was a real cultural shock for a lot of them. And that was a good example. You couldn't look at somebody and say, "Oh, this is somebody who doesn't need any extra assistance culturally." Right, in terms of managing this large academic system. Some of them really did need that extra help culturally to learn how do you manage in a system that is so unfamiliar.
Right, and that's so important because that's kind of a hidden or an internalized type of struggle that they're having. And I know that one of my patients, I've had a number of students and patients say the same thing. Ironically, they go into social work, okay, and that's supposed to be. And I'm at Ryerson, a very progressive university,
right?
And so they're in this department, and they are, because they happen to, in this case, she's a white woman. So she got part of it, she's got the woman part, but, she tried to say things and people were looking at her, you're privileged, etc. And knowing her background, it was just such a, horrific, traumatic background. And people just assumed life was easy for her. And she just said it was just so insulting to her that sometimes implicitly, but sometimes explicitly being told, you can't speak. You don't know what you're talking about. You're privileged. And again, the sad thing is when students do that, it's ugly. But when professors, and I don't know how many colleagues you've seen this, I've seen a number of colleagues both as instructor, I'm an instructor, and as a psychologist, a registered psychologist. In my discussions with my colleagues, I am seeing them promote the same type of thinking. I think they have good intentions. but the execution leaves a lot to be desired, and they don't recognize that. This is my catchphrase. They don't realize that being self-righteous does not equal righteous. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, and it's at the end of the day, it strikes me as sort of lazy, right? Because it doesn't require taking any time to get to know an individual,
right.
to explore with that individual what they know, what they've experienced, where they're going. It's just a sort of assumption of, oh, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to sum it up. And really, how is that any different from somebody who happens to be a racist cop stopping, whatever race they are, stopping a black man and deciding, well, this must be a likely criminal, right? It's the same sort of thing. It's the looking at somebody's, well, it's actually where my original work came out of. It's the assumption that anatomy tells you something about identity. And in fact, historically, what we know is that anatomy and identity have been bifurcating over time, in the sense that we've come to recognize that anatomy is not as predictive of identity as we've assumed historically, but also that with modern day culture and with modern day intervention technologies, we don't have to be bound to our anatomies the way we used to be bound to them. So, for example, somebody with paralysis in one limb may be able to walk today, even though the leg is paralyzed, because we have the technologies to do that. And so we're not in a situation anymore where anatomy and identity are simply equated the way they were culturally 300 years ago.